Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello, and welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander. My friends, they would tell you I like to ask the hard questions. You know who I am in the group. I'm the person that's saying, okay, I'm going to ask this question, but don't feel like you have to answer it. And now I can be that friend for you too. Recently, I was thinking about how all I get is positive feedback. How even though I push and push on reframing the way you look at things or asking difficult questions, I don't have any internet haters yet. Knock on wood. However, today's episode, I understand, might make people frustrated. I have a very, very diverse audience that listens to this podcast. People from around the world, people with different privileges or lack thereof, people of different ages and generations. So I know that today's episode might make some people frustrated. Honestly, some people might not even have made it this far. They might have just seen the title and the show notes and thought, absolutely not. Before we dive into the episode, I want to tell you a little story. Maybe a year ago, I was on a walk with a friend, and this is an intergenerational friendship. She is about the age of my parents. And I was sharing with her some recent frustrations I had had with parents and in-laws. How I felt like I was their only support and how intense that was. How I wanted them to go out and find other people they could talk to. Like how I really want that for them because I believe it'll make their life richer. They'll be happier. They won't be so lonely, but also so it takes a little bit of the pressure off of me. She listened quietly, really, really thought about it. And at the very end of the walk, she looked at me and she said, you know, I realize that some of the things you said today, my children have said to me. But it was a lot easier to hear it from you. When I hear it from you, I don't feel like a bad parent, but I can see myself in your story in a way I can't when my kids give me this feedback. So maybe that's my plea. If you are of an age where you have adult children, you are boomer, Gen X, I really hope that you don't feel like today's episode is an attack. Now, there are 2 millennials on here with some frustrations, so I get that that may not feel great. But for the most part, this conversation is really about how I think in all these conversations out there about family dynamics and frustrations and boundaries and estrangement, we are missing something huge. We are not talking enough about the fact that Boomer and Gen X generations, they were really told by society to focus on their career and their family, and that would bring fulfillment. And that someday when you no longer had a career, you would still have your family, and that would be fulfillment. So looking at the research, I understand why Boomers and Gen X often maybe don't have as robust of a social wellness net because that wasn't what society told you made you successful. They didn't even tell you it was a priority. And I know this because when I talk to Millennial and Gen Z people, they tell me all the time that they never saw their parents have friends. Like friendship wasn't modeled. They don't even know what it looks like to have adult friends. They don't know what it looks like to balance raising kids and having friends. So please don't feel like this is an attack. The whole hope of this episode is to maybe just bring awareness that this might be a factor if there are frustrations in your family. And if we can see this as a factor, we can put our attention there. We can work on it. We can have more conversations about it. But I have yet to see any of the therapists or reporters or whatever talk about how social wellness, or the lack thereof, is putting a lot of pressure on younger generations, and therefore might be a piece of the puzzle when it comes to setting boundaries or resetting expectations, estrangement, difficult dynamics. Finally, I want to say that if you are of those younger generations, if you are frustrated, if you are having these conversations with parents and they're not being heard, please know that this podcast, this place, is somewhere for you to go to figure out how to build what you need. Like if you're at a loss, if you've reached the point of extreme boundaries or estrangement, we talk about how to build what you need here, whatever that looks like. That could be a robust family situation. That could be a little more friends than family. It could be all friends. Whatever you need, you can build. So if you're at a place where you are just so frustrated, you don't know what to do anymore, you don't have to go without that support. You can build what you need, even if it's not coming from the places you thought it would. So with that, let's get into what I'm already bracing myself might be the most divisive episode I've released so far. But hopefully, you've all surprised me before every time I've been nervous. Hopefully, this actually just creates some really, really beautiful conversations. Hi, Janelle. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited that you're here, and I'm excited that this is your first podcast recording.
It is my very first podcast. I'm very excited. Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we have you, hooked on podcasting by the end of the episode. I don't know. When I did my first podcast episode, I got off and I thought to myself, like, wow, that was really easy. I could totally do that all the time. And now, I don't know, like a year and a half, 2 years later, this is what I do all the time. But, for anybody who's listening, Janelle and I chatted once on Zoom, have messaged a little bit. We don't know each other. I found you on TikTok. The TikTok algorithm served up your content to me, as it does, multiple times.
Hot and ready.
And after a few times, I obviously started recognizing your face, and then I clicked on your profile and I was like, oh, yep, want to follow her. I watched a little bit longer. Isn't the internet weird? The internet is so weird if you really think about it this way. And then after, I don't know, a few more days, you posted some video and I immediately messaged you saying, hey, I really want to talk about this one particular topic on the podcast, and I have yet to find anybody who's the right fit. I think you might be it. Do you want to talk about this? So I'm really excited you're here. I'll talk a little bit more about what that topic is. But do you want to tell people about your platform and the kinds of content I was getting served on the algorithm? Like, what do you talk about on the internet?
Sure. So I started a TikTok page, even though I've been a consumer of TikTok since the app started, essentially. I finally was brave and started sharing generalized experiences about having a challenging relationship with your mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
Now my platform has blossomed into other things like recipes and motherhood content, but that's definitely one of my core pillars that I share about and I'm really passionate about, is bringing awareness and community to women who have struggled with the relationship they have with their mother-in-law, because it's a challenging dynamic that's hard to navigate and can feel very isolating when you're going through it. And because of the large generational gap within that social structure, there's a lot of different factors and a lot of different reasons why women can have a challenging relationship with their mother-in-law to varying degrees. And so that's what I share about. I share relatable anecdotes. I share advice, sometimes satirically, sometimes
Well, yeah, we got to laugh
legitimately.
about it sometimes.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's what I share about on the internet for the last 3 months at least. It's going well.
I mean, this is something that people obviously want to talk about, want to feel not alone in, because you have amassed quite the following very quickly. Like, somebody needs to be talking about this. So I'm happy you posted that first video and you just said, why not? Obviously, you're way more than just this one topic. But from personal experience, if anybody's like, oh, now I know what kind of content Alex is getting served on TikTok. A challenging relationship with your mother-in-law is a hard situation to navigate. I know from personal experience. So I love that you're talking about it.
I think for a long time it's been the in-laws is like a classic trope in movies and television and probably books. I don't read a whole ton, but I should. There's more to it than that. It's not just, I could see there was a lot of content on the internet related to like bashing mother-in-laws or just complaining about the in-law dynamic in general. But then what? Like, okay, but no one is really having a productive conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, my page isn't a page where I'm hoping to start a two-sided discussion. My page is, that sometimes ends up happening, but my page is really for the women who have suffered a mistreatment to, like I said, varying degrees, and making them feel less alone.
And like crowdsourcing people's experiences and what is working, what's not working, resources they're going to, what they could try.
Yeah, I've started a Facebook page that's uber hidden to the point where it's invite only. It's a subscription-based Facebook page, also for an added level of privacy and security. And it's going really well so far. We have over 150 women in the Facebook group. And so it's just incredible, the experiences women will share. There was a woman in the group who had a baby shower coming up. And much like a lot of women in our season of life can relate to, there's a lot of really big milestone events that happen. And so those are events that it just sort of becomes, even if you have a challenging relationship with someone like a mother-in-law, their default going to be invited. And how do you navigate what's supposed to be a really celebratory day for you and your family, while this person who really seems like it's their mission to make it about them and make you miserable is going to be there. And yeah, so that's one example of, she's been sort of taking us through in the group, like the leading up to her baby shower and just all the comments and the support that pour in. And I can't believe how needed, like there was a Reddit thread. I think there's a few Reddit threads where people share these like crazy stories about their mothers-in-law. But again, that's not really, that's a place where you go and it's like shock value and you're like, whoa, like that's crazy. But like, what about the person on the receiving end? Like, what about actually like after you share the Reddit story, like the next day and the next family function, like how do you move forward in this relationship? And that's what I'm hoping to continue to help people and support people and build a platform around, is coaching women through this struggle, through communication and boundary setting and self-confidence and openness with their partner and getting on the same page, because there's obviously a lot of factors at play. And yeah, I'm glad I've been able to help the people that I've been able to reach so far. And then it's polarizing, right? So there's a lot of people on my TikTok page that have identified the need to work through and talk about the challenge of having an estranged relationship with your parents. But that nuanced dynamic of it not being, it's now your all of a sudden immediate family, however long you've been with your partner prior to getting married. And so again, referencing the generational differences, it's just sort of expected that just because you've married this person, they now assume all privileges as a parent, when in actuality, people are getting married like more commonly in their late 20s to early 30s now. And so like using the heterosexual dynamic there, but to meet a 30-year-old woman or 28-year-old woman and expect to just exist now in her life as this default, I have to respect everything you say figure, when she's established her sense of self, her independence, often her career. She's got her own family. She's got her own friends, hopefully, maybe. regardless.
Hopefully.
That's none of you. Right. Like that, I think, is really challenging for both parties. But we've got a lot of emotionally attuned millennials ready to be agile and adapt to that dynamic versus a lot of older Gen X and baby boomer mothers-in-law who perhaps hadn't anticipated that there would be this, oh, wait, my son's going to get married to this woman who is more than just his wife and is going to have expectations for.
And it's her own self and isn't just going to like fall in line to whatever you've set in your family. Yeah.
Yeah. I could tell there was a big space, or not a big, but there's quite a few creators who share a lot about it being their own family. And not that that makes it any easier. It's just different because what I'm finding is the women that I connect with, some have partners that are on the exact same page as them. And some are somewhere in the middle where they can't even really openly, candidly share with their partner how they're feeling, or their partner is still of the mindset of like, just continue to, don't worry about it. Or like, she's always been this way or whatever it is. And like, that's really invalidating. And so it's sometimes not as big of a deal where they're ready to end their relationship, but they want to know, okay, how do I navigate these waters with this other person who has likely been sustained to this treatment their entire life, but isn't really ready to heal or doesn't know that they need to, or any number of things. And it's a bit of a basket of cats.
Yeah. Like talk about taking on, I feel sometimes like I've taken on this really like overwhelming, intense topic. Talking to you, I'm like, oh, okay. We're just navigating a bunch of trapdoors here all the time. We are.
And I'm very careful to make sure I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed social worker. I'm just a girl with an MBA who likes communication and thinks that through effective communication, sometimes you can at least find a path for yourself that you're comfortable with. And that's what I'm hoping to help women with. Like, healing past trauma is a job for a therapist, definitely. But my goal is to help women create a plan that they feel comfortable with, that they can action and get alignment with their partner and move forward in a way that makes them feel at peace. Rather than this being something that just like, it's awful. Every family event or every milestone, like that being something that you have to like have all these considerations for, it's just silly,
I do. Yes. Okay. So now everybody knows why I was so excited to have you on here, because what I want to talk about is something that I think is being left out of this conversation, this like generational expectations, pressure conversation. I follow, because we now have covered, in all the creators and the therapists and the people that I have read their content and seen what they're putting out there, right? There's talk about boundaries, and there's talk about what to do if you are estranged. And there's, dozens of other topics. I went back before this episode and looked through 5 of these people's content to see if I could find anything about social wellness, loneliness, lack of hobbies. Because my theory is that one of many factors, this is not the only factor by any means, but one of the factors we're not talking about is that these older generations, the boomers and Gen Xers, a lot of them don't have a very strong social wellness situation. They focused a lot on like work and family as a generation, not so much on hobbies or other connections. And I can't tell you the number of people I talk to that are millennials where when we are discussing friendships, community, they will tell me, like, I never saw my parents have friends. We hung out with maybe some extended family. They went to possibly some sort of community group or religious organization, but they're like, my parents didn't have friends. And now the common thread when I talk to friends who have a lot of frustrations with or like strained relationships with their parents or their in-laws, because I'm curious about this stuff, generally ask them like, do your parents have friends? Do they have hobbies? Do they have things that they do to fill their time? And more often than not, they say no, or, well, they have a couple people that they see, but they don't like really actively reach out or do things with them, which then means that a lot of their social wellness needs fall back on their children and their grandchildren, which is a lot of pressure to be always wanting to spend time together. Like you're the only person checking in on them. You're the default person to go do activities, even if you don't want to do them. The point of this episode really is just the hope that talking about this might for some people be an aha moment of, oh, maybe this is a part of the problem. Because I haven't seen anybody talk about this. Have you seen anybody talk about this?
I haven't. And touching on this topic in my Facebook group, actually last night, one of the girls just sort of out of nowhere asked, so like, why is this such a prevalent issue? Like, why is this happening? And she wasn't specifically talking about in-laws who don't have hobbies or in-laws who are putting all their social wellness chits in their children's basket. But she was specifically talking about like, is it just mothers of boys that are struggling with this? Like, why is this such a pervasive issue? And so, no, I haven't seen anyone talk about it. But as someone who talks about it now, I can see why. Like, it's so divisive. It's so polarizing. It's pretty taboo. There's still a lot of people who think that, like, exactly like you were talking about at the beginning, family is family. And it's a lot of still hush hush. It's a lot of people don't want to, quote, air their dirty laundry, which, yeah, I mean, my intention is never to offend. My intention is never to stereotype. It's to, let's try to discover here, why has this happened? So that when we're mothers-in-law, my children are babies, but when I'm a mother-in-law, hopefully in the next 20 or 30 years, like we'll have a breadth of understanding about what are some of the risk factors here that can lead these dynamics astray. What are the things to watch for? And I think definitely, if not a main factor, a definite contributing factor is overall fulfillment in where you're at in your life. And a huge component of that, regardless of your age, is, yeah, social wellness and interests and social connections. And the other piece, in addition to the topic we're talking about today, is, in my opinion, is is compounded on that, what's happened, as you've described in a lot of cases that you've observed and I've observed as well, which I think is definitely true, where baby boomers just sort of expected that this is how it was going to go, is that lack of communication. Like, I don't think anyone who's found themselves in this situation was ever explicitly communicated by their parent at 15 or 20 or whatever age. Just so you know, I don't have a lot going on outside of my job and raising you. So hope you like insert whatever the parent's interest is, because my expectation is you're going to do that with me. Right? Like, that's not a conversation that was ever happening.
If that was a conversation at a certain point, somebody probably would have said like, oh, well, I don't really like that. Do you think you want to go meet some people who do? Or, okay, well, if some older baby boomer Gen Xer had said, I expect that we're going to see you multiple times a week and that every weekend is spent with you once you have kids or reach a certain age. And like, I need to see you X number of times a month. There probably would have been like okay, well, not sure how that's going to fit in with raising my own kids, a partnership, my career, my passions, my friends. Like, yeah, I want to see you, but like, I can't be it. And I think that's what's ended up happening to a good number of people is a lot of these older generations. It's kind of similar actually to, I hear this from women who want to be moms and are trying to get pregnant. And then they don't have friends because life changes have happened, right? People have moved, careers, whatnot. And people will tell me, I've truly had people tell me this, and they'll say, well, I'll just make mom friends when I have kids. And you're waiting for like this next quote unquote life stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this happens also with the baby boomers and Gen Xers of, okay, well, my kids have left. At a certain point, I'm going to retire. Maybe they find a couple things. They start playing golf or whatever. But there's this idea of, well, I'll just wait until I'm grandparents, or I'll just wait until you're done living across the country and you move back home, or I'll just wait until this. But that's still depending on their kids and their grandkids, putting like all this pressure on that.
I think there was probably also just like because they are now, I can tell by my comment section, but they weren't really active users of social media. And we do know that social media is a benefit and a curse, right? There's situations where social media is making people, women, anybody feel more isolated because they feel like everyone is having so much fun. Meanwhile, it's like the highlight reel of their life or whatever the case is. That we know that that's a downfall of social media in terms of your mental health related to friendships and socialization. But the benefit for those of us who have grown up with social media is we're able to like very quickly, a lot of the time, make connections, make meaningful connections, and nurture connections that we've already had. Whereas I think with likely the older generation, I think there was probably like, they weren't great at recognizing that a lot of these relationships and friendships that they had either at their place of employment or maybe through through their children, whatever that looked like, were surface level. You're seeing this person every day because you go to work and they know so much about you and you're chatting with them, but you're busy with your own stuff after work, or it's after work. So you just hang out with your husband or not, or whatever you do.
Yeah. They haven't figured out how to take it outside of that, which would make the launch.
And they didn't realize that.
Yes.
So they retired and then they're like, oh, I don't talk to anybody anymore about I don't go to work and have those conversations. Even for myself, I'm currently on maternity leave, and I'm surprised at, yes, there's a few friends I have from work that I'm still in connection with readily, but there's also friends at work that, were some of my closest comrades at work that I haven't talked to in the 9 months I've been off work. And it's like, there's no hard feelings there. It's just, we're work friends, like if we're not working together, I don't I have enough other friends and I'm not necessarily checking in on them.
Yeah, it's a skill set to take like a work friendship. I call that a defined friendship. So you're really connected about like one area of life, one shared experience, and develop I call them roots, other connection points, basically, because you have to take a little bit of a risk and invite them to do something outside your comfort zone. You have to set that up. You have to initiate it. You have to follow up and create consistency. And that is not something that Western culture as a whole is doing very well. So then they retire. And even if you are going to, say, a bowling league or a whatnot, if you never really develop that skill of how to take it outside a bowling league, you're still siloed in only these one connection point friendships, which can be really beautiful. But then I guess if you compare them to like the richness of your family and your kids and your grandkids, like obviously there's going to be a vast difference. But if you could learn the skill sets to form these more present friendships that touch on more areas of your life, again, those are never going to replace or compete with your kids or your grandkids, but they can be another really fulfilling area of connection.
But I think that same skill set that they're lacking is the reason why there's so much tension and animosity in these like expected quote unquote friendships that are supposed to just appear out of nowhere with their adult children, because in a lot of these cases, when we're speaking generationally, there's still, because I said so parents, there's still, because I'm your mom parent, there's still, like all the different stereotypes that we can go into about how baby boomers raise their kids versus how we're raising children now. And that's not to say that you were supposed to be your child's best friend. I think there's science supporting the fact that that's not ideal either. But ultimately, if you're not evolving and the relationship isn't evolving with that, it sounds like this skill set that they're likely not utilizing or perhaps don't even have, then all of a sudden you're expecting your child to be your friend when like you don't even know them on that level. And so it's also expected to be this one-sided dynamic where we all know that's not a fulfilling friendship. It needs to go both ways.
This is why I love not formally doing like a scripted episode, because sometimes things just appear. And I hadn't really thought about this. And I don't know how much you've dove through my website, but I have my book is on this theory I call my roots theory. And one of them is called a story root. So it's basically the beliefs we hold about our friendships. But if I'm being honest, I think that all this stuff I talk about applies to all relationships. So I think it really applies here. So it's like the beliefs you have. So if you meet someone and you hit it off on like that first meeting and you leave and you're like, we're going to be best friends. The expectations you have of that relationship are pretty high. You haven't had enough experiences together to actually have evidence that you are in fact acting in ways that support this belief.
It's like falling in love on vacation or summer camp, right? Like it's not real life. It's one time,
And there's 3 ways we get these story roots. One is we actually collect the evidence. Another one is we just pick the belief like on vacation or deciding initially. The third one is from societal messages. So listening to you talk about that, right? Basically, when you get married, the societal message about your in-laws is their family. And we are family comes with a very long list of expectations. But there's really no interactions or evidence, or very minimal, right? Because it's only probably been a few years of time versus their child with decades. And whether that evidence even supports that belief is a whole other piece of it. But now, like this goes back to what you were saying about communication, that these new family members, the daughters-in-law, are acting towards this belief with these expectations that they didn't even pick. The other person's not really reciprocating maybe in the same way. And it's just creating this experience of you can say whatever you're going to say, but it doesn't align. So why would I buy into it?
They go hand in hand, right? I think a person who has social wellness in the form of hobbies and friendships and other interests, they're just naturally going to be more socially agile to meeting a new person and to like just the
slowly
overall
building, like co-creating together.
Like, they're better equipped to navigate the organic development of a new relationship. Whereas someone who has had sort of forced friendships because coworkers are just, you work with who you work with. And yeah, it's great that you make it work. But I think that's what they're expecting to happen a lot of the time with a adult child or an in-law, because of family, but or also because, well, this is a person that my adult child has decided to spend their life with. So now we'll make it work come hell or high water, when it's like, have you even communicated what make it work looks like for you? And that's just silly. That's just not how millennial adults in general have adult relationships anymore. There's an expectation of reciprocity when it comes to respect. And that's just is what it is. And I think different people have different levels of tolerance for how much they're willing to withstand. But that's when these dynamics go so sideways a lot of the time. But related to the social wellness and the other hobbies, yeah, when you don't have so much pressure on the relationship to be on this, like perform to this pedestal that you have in your mind for yourself because you've got other things to do, and other people to see and other conversations to have, it doesn't become so consequential if you have this interaction with your child that isn't exactly how you thought it would go. Like, you're not dwelling on it, you're not hanging on it, you're not, because you're going to like go to the gym the next day, or like go see your friends, or go to book club, or whatever you're going to do, you know?
Yeah. Or if your kid sets a boundary and can't help you for some reason with, I don't know, picking up from the hospital or for after a small procedure. Okay. I'm not saying we're like completely ignoring our parents in big moments, but you know, you be like, oh, I understand. And it's okay because I have other people to call who will help me. But if you have kind of put all your social wellness eggs in one basket, then that boundary suddenly is, okay, well, if you say no, I have no one. Who do I call? How do I find the support I need?
And then you get into the guilt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then naturally a statement of exactly like you just said is said to the adult child, which is an objectively true statement, but very much feels like a guilt trip statement when it's directed at you. You're like, okay.
Oh yeah. And you feel guilty, but what we're not talking about, I mean, we are in this episode, but most people aren't talking about, I think, is people need to be responsible for building their own support system and their own social wellness, that you can't put that on someone else. You have to create what you need. And if that has been ignored for a very long period of time, just like other areas of health, like financial wellness, if you've ignored your finances, at a certain point, you have to dive in and pick yourself up.
Figure it out. Yeah.
And so, you know, if you had a financial issue, it's not fair to look at somebody else in your family, a sibling, let's say, and say, okay, well, go fix it. I need you. You do this now. So why does it get to be that way with social wellness? We're not pointing the mirror back kind of and saying, okay, well, you need to go supplement this so that I am a part of it, but I am not completely it. And you have to go build yourself some additional support.
Like, if we think of it, everyone gets up in arms whenever you try to equate or parallel the dynamic with a parent or a parental figure with truly any other relationship, people literally don't hear the rest of the sentence because they immediately think, well, exactly like you said, family is family, or but it's your parents, whatever it is. But again, we're talking about two adults that, yes, that is your parent. But if we're talking about two adults who are trying to build an adult relationship, still rooted in parent and child, but different now that the child is an adult and independent. Think about that type of dynamic in any other relationship context, right? Think of the needy girlfriend or the needy boyfriend. When it's a girlfriend or boyfriend who doesn't have anything else going on, like that would be, to your peers, they would say red flag. You know, they would say, this is probably a person that's not going to be healthy for you. But when it's your parent doing that to you, that's apparently appropriate, right? Like, it isn't appropriate.
It isn't appropriate. And obviously everyone's situation is different. You have kids. I do not, right? So everyone has additional pressures, but then there's this other situation that's happening where millennials are now getting, like, having to be the social support for their children and their parents. And that's a lot while trying to build their own and teach their kids how to do this someday so that they're never in this situation.
And have a career or whatever they're doing.
I just want to clarify what I'm talking about here. So I mentioned earlier in the episode that when I talk to a lot of millennials, they tell me that they were never modeled friendship and community, that their parents growing up, they spent time with extended family or they attended places of worship, things like that. They didn't, a lot of them, have close friendships or really any friendships, I hear quite often, which is unfortunate and sad and lonely. But what that means is that this millennial generation is really sandwiched with this problem on all sides. This was not a priority for older generations. And like studies show that the boomer Gen X generations were really told like to be successful, have kids, be great at your job. And then when you retire, you'll be a grandparent. Social wellness, friendship, connection was not seen as a marker of success. So I get why they, as a generation, didn't invest time here. But what that means is that we have this generation who hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about social wellness, cultivating those habits or skills, building their broader support system. I have millennials who are listening to this podcast, who are over here trying to figure out how to do this for themselves. I also have a lot of millennials, Gen Z, who are listening and wanting to not have their kids repeat this scenario. So now we have millennials, Gen Z trying to reparent themselves while also satisfying the older generation's social wellness needs that are falling on them and try and teach their kids. And that's just a lot. But I really feel like what I hear from a lot of people is that that's your reality. I look at this, I don't want to call it a trend, but like this overwhelming pattern of strained family relationships and estrangement and all the people starting to talk about this. And there are a myriad of factors, but I just don't think this one's being addressed. And if we lay it out in that sense, like this generation is being thrown so many really difficult scenarios at once. And we're just not talking about the fact that this is an added pressure on us that really isn't our problem.
Well, and I think that again, people elect not to talk about it because they put it on this pedestal of family is family. But when we look at it pragmatically, which is talking about humans who in general are in a really, really resource intensive season of life, and naturally humans are going to travel to the path of least resistance. And if that relationship in your life is a point of resistance, it's just organically going to be something that you start to avoid. And then it becomes, whose responsibility is it to repair that connection or to alleviate that tension? And I think the jury is still out on that because, again, who has the bandwidth to start to begin to navigate those waters? I've talked about this on my TikTok page and it really was divisive, but if you're a resistance point in that millennial who's in a really busy season of life, they're going to avoid that resistance point because it doesn't make them feel good. It's a detriment to their mental health. You're just not going to see your grandkids that much. And that's really sad. But also not putting so much pressure on a relationship and being able to work your way through those challenging moments and boundaries when there's that expectation, maybe that wasn't communicated, and you can just be open about it and move forward. There was a situation at Christmas time where my mom was hosting some people over, and out of all my cousins coming, I was the only one who had children, and my second was very, very young, and we had just moved into our new house. And so there's a lot of things on the go, busy. And of course, everyone's got their own stuff on the go. But my mom had asked me what I was going to bring. I hadn't volunteered to bring anything yet. And she said, "What are you going to bring?" And I was sort of standoffish about it. I was like, "I'll bring buns," which is sort of, in my mom's world, that would be a cop-out, like just buying a bag of buns and bringing them. And so she like kept following up, "You're just going to bring buns?" And so finally I just said, "Mom, is this like, you're going to be embarrassed to my aunts and uncles if I've only brought buns? Is that what you're trying to tell me?" And she just sort of snapped in an instant. She said, "Janelle, you're an adult. It's a group dinner. Everyone has to bring something. You know that." And I said, "I'm the only one bringing dependents. So
yeah,
I'm okay being the bad guy here and saying, perhaps we can implement a new rule. I know you had to bring me and my sister and a potluck item and all the presents and everything but like, could we not implement a rule where—
can we break that pattern?" Yeah.
Yes. Let's. And so she was, because we have that open rapport, she was like, "Oh, wait, this isn't about me. you're right. And now we have the rule where if your family has a child that cannot walk themselves to the door, you don't have to bring anything. Just bring your family.
I love that rule. A lot of people are probably going to listen to this and implement that rule.
Like, my hands are physically full. If I have to make 2 trips to the car, like, no, my children can walk themselves. Then I can carry the gifts and the potluck item. Good. Like, that's our new rule.
Honestly, as somebody who doesn't have kids, I would tell you not to bring anything. I tell our friends that have kids not to bring anything every time, except the children, if they want.
Right. But there's, as I've seen in my comments, there's so many people who wholeheartedly disagree. They think that, why would you come empty-handed? You have to bring something. And that's where we get into those undertoned, implicit, laced expectations that aren't being communicated. And so whether it's expectations of how you're going to exist at family functions as an adult, or how you're going to exist in their life as an adult, if that hasn't been effectively communicated in a way that you've been able to gauge that there's mutual understanding.
Communicated and co-created. That's the other thing, right? Like, you can communicate. My mother-in-law can communicate all she wants. That does not mean that is going to be the end agreement. We have to discuss and come up right with I don't have kids, but if I had kids, like, I have children, I will not be carrying this. You can't just say the thing, which, as we've mentioned before, is definitely a skill that is cultivated more when you have friends and you can't just walk in with these expectations. Like, you have to figure it out in each relationship.
Right. Like, friendships don't last long if there's a person who's unilaterally deciding everything for the group, right? But yet that seems to be the dynamic and the expectation in a lot of these parent-child adult dynamics is a parent has unilaterally decided how their child is going to exist in their life forevermore. And that just doesn't make sense. Like, I think that when you look at just the overall aspect that having a bigger social network, how that benefits just your overall ability to be able to navigate this type of situation. Also, the aspect of checking yourself, right? And so I know for my parents, they've respectively got their own friend groups. They've got friend groups that they have as couples. And so I don't doubt that my sister and I have gone through things before where they've relayed what's happened, or they're venting, or they're lamenting, whatever it is. And they're getting real-time feedback from their friends who aren't family members, right? They aren't family members who also unconditionally love me and my sister, right? Like, let's just be honest about that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if you're lacking that social wellness network outside of people who are either family or essentially might as well be family because they've been your friend since you were 19 and now you're 60, they also watched your child grow up. They also are nearly a parental figure to your child. And so you're not really getting like a true devil's advocate perspective on whatever your thought is on the topic. And I think that that's really helpful. I know for my mom, having seen what I've gone through, my mom has a lot of friends that are a bit younger than her. And so their children are just sort of starting to get into serious relationships. And some of her friends have brought topics to their gym class or whatever they're doing. And
their time together.
Whatever they do. And they're complaining. They're complaining about their son's girlfriend or their son and their girlfriend or whatever. And my mom is always able to offer the like, okay, but like, let's have that thought, not just those words, but let's have that entire vibe stay here, because it is not going to serve you if you take that energy back to your next interaction with your son and look at this big picture. What do you big picture want to happen? You want your son to be happy? Yes. Like, don't split hairs on whatever this like little bugaboo is. Like, it's not worth it. And my mom's able to share her observed experience or her learned experience to her friends and vice versa. And it's not just related to relationships with adult children. When you have that social wellness and you have those dynamics, you're able to get that on all fronts, right? Like retirement finances or
I thought it was going to be my example. My dad called me when he had to retire and was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. Now, mind you, he's fine. He was like totally fine. They called me panicking. And I just remember being like, I am decades from retirement. Why would you ever think that I am the right person for this? This is one, like a worry I don't want to deal with. Not my problem. I don't have the expertise for this. Like, you need to go call someone who's done this or somebody who is in the same season of life trying to figure it out. You got to go crowdsource this problem. This is not me. So you're totally right. Like, having that support network of peers in similar periods of life or who have already experienced that period of life to rely on. So you're not just asking the only people you have who maybe are not the right people. I have talked about this concept of the easy ask before. For example, I actually was reviewing all my past podcast episodes. And if you look, episode number 2 is with Michael, my husband. Now, was Michael maybe really the ideal person to throw in a podcast episode? He doesn't do this for a living. He doesn't create content. Although he hears me talk about all this all the time, and he is generally interested. It's not his passion, but he was the easy ask. I knew he would do this for me. I knew that even though it was awkward, he'd be fine. I see him every day. I probably should have asked someone else. And I could have. I have a broad and diverse group of people around me that fill a variety of areas of my life. There are people I could have thought about to ask instead. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. Even though I have that, I still opted into using the easy ask because it was uncomfortable to ask somebody else because I knew Michael would do it for me. But when you don't have that support system, it's immeasurably harder to go find someone to help you. So not only are you overcoming the easy ask, which for a lot of parents might be their kids, you're also having to overcome the fact that like you really maybe don't have peers in this area or in this time of life. You don't have the vulnerability to ask these types of questions. You've never broached this subject. So I have mentioned this idea before, but just it's so important to build what we need before we need it. Because in the moments that we do need it, like this moment where you're trying to ask really intense questions like, how do I retire? That's going to be a hard moment to build the connections you need. So if you're waiting for any reason, until this thing happens, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next year, I'll do it when I retire, I'll do it whenever. Don't wait, just start taking small actions because then hopefully you'll have built what you need before you need to tap into it.
And I think when your network gets smaller, you also often lose the people in your life who are just going to maybe be more of an effective listener and empathize and validate how you're feeling and let you just be in that moment for a sec before you move forward. And you end up with people who are right away, because they also specifically related to the adult-child dynamic, because they know your child so well, because they're either also a relative or longtime family friend, because you haven't expanded that social network, they're right away coming in with solutions, which I think then probably dilutes and misconstrues what maybe would have been a more productive thing to do in that situation, which is just like, let them say whatever they're going to say and say, I'm sure that's really frustrating. And then like my mom said to her friend, like, just, okay, like, let's put that in a box because it's not going to help you. You don't need to fix that. That doesn't need to be fixed. That would be a silly thing to dwell on or to fix. And then they're like, oh yeah, you're right. Rather than people saying, oh, well, what about this? What about this? Because they also feel like they're a parental figure to your child.
Yeah.
And they should also be helping you because they did for so many years help you raise your children, right? Whereas my mom has friends. Yes, my mom has definitely friends that watch me grow up and were friends with my mom through all my seasons of life. But she also has friends that she's acquired in the last 10 years which is definitely since I've become an adult.
Yeah.
Telling on myself, right? Like she has friends that she's only had for the last 10 or 15 years since that she's made at the gym or she made wherever. And they don't know me. Truly. They know of me. I've maybe met them a handful of times, but they don't know me. And so it would be very weird for them to like start telling my mom what she should do about, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's such an important role and distinction is they can be that impartial ear of like, okay, let it out. And then, you know, maybe identify a pattern or say that this isn't going to serve you to move forward, or here's my experience. And none of it's like the advice it takes you into account, but not in the same way it would if they had just watched you your entire life. It is definitely a more neutral response.
Totally. I think I've said specifically related to, this is more so prevalent definitely for women, but also could be for baby boomer men, or really any, like as our generation ages too. But I've said this I think I've said this on my TikTok channel. And I said that if I had found myself in a totally estranged relationship with for sure my daughter-in-law, but also my adult child, and now what? Right? Maybe you're still like buried under the anger, the frustration of it, but I would be looking to my left and my right, and I wouldn't necessarily put the onus on them, but I would definitely have some pretty pointy questions for my network of people, right? Like if you have a network, my words on my TikTok page that I said were, have female friendships, have people in your life who love you enough to tell you things you don't want to hear. Have people in your life who love you enough to not be afraid of you and say things to you that you might not want to hear, because whether it's your dynamic with your adult child or really any other event you're going to go through in your life and your evolution of your life, there's going to be things that come up that you need people in your life who are going to tell you things you don't want to hear. And that doesn't mean you want people in your life who are just always going to be the devil's advocate. Like I said, you need people who are effective listeners too, who are going to let you say what you want to say and say, okay, and then give you a call the next day and say, you seemed really upset about that. I don't know that that's a productive thought for you moving forward. Do you want to talk about it a bit more?
Yeah, you're really stuck on this one thought. You can't get out of it. Have you noticed that?
Yeah. And those are the people that you want in your life. And those are the social connections that you, I think, would want to make sure you have and are nurturing as you enter the post-retirement phase of your life. Because just because you're retired and just because you're at the end, which you're not at the end, there's so much life left to live just because you have adult children. Exactly. That doesn't mean that everything gets easy. And that doesn't mean that you've got it all figured out. You don't. Just like I know, despite what my TikTok commenters think, I know that I don't have it all figured out. But the point is, I'm actively trying to gain different perspectives so that I'm not going to fall into these same downfalls, pitfalls, mistakes.
Yeah. The point of this episode, like I said, was really just to have a conversation. This is not going to ring true for everyone. Social wellness is not the only reason at all. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if it's 10% or less. But I do think this is a piece of it.
Definitely.
For a lot of people. And that is just important to be aware of, because in these situations, in these tense situations, I think the family dynamic, right, it can just be one person versus one person or two people versus each other. And maybe taking a step back and looking at like the whole picture of, you know, maybe the adult child has built this really great support system and the parent has not, and they're frustrated because their time is limited. I think quite often the answer then is, okay, well, boundaries and setting up time and negotiating and visiting with the grandkids, like negotiating all these boundaries, when maybe just part of the conversation is saying to the parent, like, hey, maybe if you weren't lonely all the time, then that would help alleviate this pressure we're feeling here as a piece of the problem in conjunction with boundaries and setting all that stuff up. I had this thought earlier and I'll just drop it in here. The other thing that I think is interesting when the social wellness piece is lacking. I have felt this, so somebody else may or may not identify with it, is if your parents don't have a great social wellness situation, if they're lonely and you are their social connection, when you show up, you have things to share. You have gone and done things. You are living your life. You've seen friends. You've changed a job, decided to have kids. You have things to share. And it's a lot of pressure when your parent shows up and they're lonely and they really haven't done anything. And all they want is to basically like live vicariously through you and hear about your life experience, but they don't have anything really to contribute.
I was actually going to think the opposite. My experience is I've observed that when that social wellness piece is lacking, they arrive to see their child who they should be listening to share about their interests, their successes, struggles, etc., grandchildren interests, but instead they spend the entire gathering sharing themselves because they've had no one else to talk to about it.
Oh yeah, that's a layer of it. Yes.
And then that leaves the adult child feeling like, okay, so I'm simultaneously supposed to fulfill these expectations you have for me of coming to see you and bringing my kids to see you and doing whatever activities with you that you expect because I'm your child, but you have no interest in hearing about, you don't have any questions for what's going on with me. And unfortunately, I think if you're not like attuned to what's happening there, it just, all it feels like is you're expected to be around this person who only wants to talk about what's going on with themselves, which is just emotionally very draining.
Let me clarify this because I think that's a great piece of it, right? My personal experience, and I'm sure this is not everyone's, is they don't really have anything to contribute. So they ask you about your life and you tell them, hoping they will actually be interested, but then they aren't really interested. They aren't listening to listen. They are listening to judge, to comment, for it to be their social status. So they don't have anything actually about themselves to contribute, but they are sure doing a lot of talking about themselves. And it really doesn't have to do with them. It has to do with like you, me. And you're like, okay, well, maybe if you went out and lived and traveled yourself or did these things, you'd be less focused on what I have chosen to do because you would actually have things to share with me about your life, whether they're good or bad, or you feel good or bad about them versus feeling good or bad about what I have done.
Absolutely. Or share, like ask you a question, you respond with whatever, and then that somehow triggers like an irrelevant story 20 years ago, or like, okay. Like I specifically remember when I was pregnant with my first, maybe even when I was pregnant with my second. And that's where it gets challenging because like, yeah, for me, I know that it isn't being done out of malice, but that why is that my responsibility to, right? The number one rule in communication is it is the communicator's responsibility to ensure that their message was received as intended, whether that's through word choice, tone of voice, eye contact, body language, etc. And so when I was pregnant with my first, I was asked a question about what my plan was for something like postpartum, or I can't remember. And I shared just like the initial part of my response. And then my mother-in-law responded with a story about my husband's cousin's wife who, well, she did this and this and this. Wasn't telling me what to do. Maybe that tone I just tried to communicate it with was wrong, but Marissa was just like, well, this happened and this is the, and I was like, okay. And I think like perhaps it's considered an interesting anecdote, but when you think about it in the like the vacuum of that conversation, like it's incredibly insensitive and invalidating. You don't need to share something. Sometimes you can just, and that's, I think that aspect of relationship and social dynamic that they maybe don't have inherently. And I think rapidly declines once you're out of the workforce, rapidly declines once you're not having those social conversations all day where you're having to stay up to snuff on like how to have a proper conversation. So then am I allowed to have hurt feelings? I don't know. Like, was it rude? I'm not sure. But when that happens over and over and over, it's hard.
It wears you down really quickly. And there's so many factors to it. You know, my personal experience is like, there's so many factors happening at the same time. Like you're saying of like, am I wrong? Are they wrong? Was that rude? I don't know. That you walk away from these scenarios so confused. It's like a big ball of yarn all knotted up and you're trying to figure it out. And you're one side. And it's just, as somebody who has gone through it yourself, I feel for anybody else who is in the situations of unraveling this. And the answer to why is never going to be the same. We can't just give an answer, but hopefully conversations like this will bring awareness to the possible factors that could be at play here and what each person might try for their half of the relationship, for their part of the relationship, to like bring their best version to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that is experienced in all seasons of life, in all relationships, potentially, right? I think we all have that friend that has been kind of going through it, and you end up being the punching bag, right? Like they become hypercritical of everything that you're sharing. They become really, in the moment, it feels really like, gosh, like, and then when you look at it or you move through it and you reflect, you're like, oh, they were just really unhappy. And I've definitely reflected about myself about times where that's happened, but it's different when it's your parent, and it's different when it seems like whatever this circumstance is, because of where they're at in their life, like there's no clear reason or catalyst that state would come to an end where they would find, unless, like you're suggesting, unless they seek inputs of social wellness fulfillment. And how is that? It becomes very daunting. Like, how is this going to change? How does this change? Because if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? And that's the other, I think, especially with baby boomers, there seems to just be this, whether it's baby boomers or anybody, the people who subscribe to like family is family and therefore family can do anything and it's still family. They also very often, I would say the overlapping area, the Venn diagram of people who subscribe to the family is family, and the people who also think that a passage of time equals change, specifically related to feelings being unhurt or things being unsaid. Like, yes, time does heal all wounds, but a lot of the time those emotional wounds are different. And they think that, oh, we didn't see them for a while, so it'll have act passed. Like nothing happened. Yeah. And it didn't.
Yeah. I've said this before on the podcast, but you know, the whole family is family is quite often, not always, but quite often used in this. The undertone is kind of, you know, it's a free pass to do whatever. You'll still love me no matter what. And to me, like my personal definition, if I call someone family, to me, that means I will work harder on myself to try and figure out how to make this work for everyone and feel good. Like I will work harder. It's not a free pass. It is me like promising to do what I can to make these relationships fulfilling for everybody. And part of that, right, is like the personal development piece of working on yourself. And that could mean a whole variety of things, but one of which might be having a solid like support system and social wellness situation.
Yeah, definitely. I actually, having parents who are retired, my recollection is when my mom retired, she said that ahead of retirement, her employer provided a lot of planning and information sessions, workshops, where it wasn't just talking about the financial side of things. Like, okay, you're going to be on fixed income now. What does that look like? And they talked about everything. They talked about how, okay, well, you realize you're going to need less budget for clothes because you're not going to work and wearing through your clothes all the time. But they did talk about just overall, what are you planning to do? How are you planning to fill your day? But my mom worked at a large employer and they have the resources to do that and the infrastructure to put that on. I think if people aren't in that situation, there's no one explicitly laying that out for them. And then there's also just the self-awareness part of me, where I think there's a lot of people where even if that's said to them, they're not grabbing a mirror and looking at their own life and saying, okay, wait, does this actually apply to me? Because that's hard to do. But it's definitely something that people are aware of. It's just maybe not given as much emphasis as it is. And I definitely know that the element of considering your dynamic with your adult children wasn't touched on in my mom's retirement.
Add that to the curriculum. You're going to do that. That's going to be you. You're going to come in and help some people maybe. We're going to prevent this problem for future generations. Well, not we, you. Single-handedly. Well, you never know what one really motivated person can do with some time in their life. But Janelle, I want to say thank you, because this is a tricky topic. This whole idea I presented is not one that's really discussed. And we kind of just wandered our way through what might be the factors. And I really appreciate you kind of going on this explorative conversation with me, so that, you know, my greatest hope is that people listen to this and share, right? We talk about it. This is just like starting a conversation. We're not saying we know the answer, but if more people share, we might start to find common threads, or people might try this and it might make an impact. So at least it's out there for people to consider in their own lives and their own situations. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I mean, this was really fun to get to chat with you about this. This is obviously a topic that I'm quite passionate about. And so it's nice to be able to share about it within the context of a podcast, and where you're not limited to these short form video content, little clips here and there, and really kind of start to dig into some of these things. And this was my first podcast.
These are big topics, like what you talk about when I talk about the big topics, and they're so hard in the short clips. So I hope that recording this gave you a little taste of the podcast, and now maybe you're hooked.
No, what I was going to say is, so many people think that because it's a hard topic, you shouldn't talk about it. And I think we know that that's just fundamentally not
that
true.
is the opposite of a lot of people do believe that. My belief is definitely the opposite. Like, oh, it's hard? Tell me about it. Yeah.
Tell me.
All right. With that, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you take some time for however you feel, whatever that left you with. Maybe you saw yourself in this episode. You were nodding your head yes. Maybe you completely disagree, whatever that is. No matter what, I hope it starts a conversation, because what I really hope is that we start talking about the impact that social wellness can have on our lives. Because I think that it really is such a foundational piece that is impacting so many areas. I also hope that if you are somebody who listened to this and you are in that sandwich generation, you're millennial, Gen Z, you're struggling with navigating difficult family relationships, go ahead to Janelle's page, her platform, find that Facebook group she mentioned. You don't have to do this alone. You can go find other people to have productive conversations with for how you can navigate this situation. And stick around here, because like I said in the intro, we spend a lot of time talking about how to build what you need. You don't have to do this alone. You really can build a support system, even if it looks a little different than you thought. And with that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @itsAlexAlexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting, and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.